Right, so welcome everybody to our first seminar for 2025. We have the pleasure of hosting Dr. Pearson Sibanda, who will be talking to us about seeing in systems. Before we get any further into the presentation, I'm just going to tell everybody a little bit more about Dr. Pearson. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur. Who until 2017, he was an electrical engineering consultant with a company he co-founded in 2001 after some considerable time in the corporate world. Currently, Pearson is an independent business and management consultant who provides business advisory services focusing on strategic leadership and systems thinking. He also provides expert advice on business expansion into the rest of the African continent. Pearson's latest assignment was as a technical lead writer for the International Fund for Agriculture Development on their mission to South Sudan. Before that, he had done assignments for the IFA and the Food and Agricultural Organization as business and enterprise development expert, value chain development expert, and fisheries economist in Eritrea, Mozambique, and in South Africa. He has given lectures on entrepreneurship and systems thinking at various business schools whenever time has allowed. He presented a paper on the natural resources curse at the Conference on Sustainable Development held at the University of Michigan in 2019. So welcome again, Dr. Sibanda. To everybody that's attending, we as the South African System Dynamics chapter, we are a chapter of volunteers and we are affiliated to the International System Dynamics Society. The System Dynamics chapter was officially recognized at the 2014 Winter Policy Meeting of the International System Dynamics Society. Our vision is to be globally recognized and leading the System Dynamics chapter while advancing African skills development in a financially sustainable manner. And our mission is to encourage the growth of systems thinking, system dynamics in Africa, and establish capabilities through training, education, and digitized support, as well as doing all of this through collaborative engagements. We have various objectives as a chapter. Our very first one is knowledge and understanding. Obviously, we want to be able to identify, develop, extend, and disseminate knowledge to interested parties in the space and in the fraternity. We also support learning and research as well as education and training. And part of the seminar series objectives is actually to provide education and training via experts in different subjects, actually then speaking about their subject areas. This is our council members. We have a couple of council members online. I'm the president of the South African System Dynamics chapter. We have Dr. Andries Botha, who's the outgoing president. And he and Corneille are actually the ones that run the learning labs, which I think a lot of people internationally and across the globe are now very familiar with. So that's another opportunity that if anybody's interested, also a free learning opportunity. We also have Professor Rudolf Oosthuizen, who I know is online. He is our treasurer and runs the student workshops together with our other council member, Alesi. And then we have Dr. Young, who is in charge of our social media, and Mr. Corneille, who will at some stage also be a Dr. Corneille. And like I said, Corneille and Andries actually run the Learning Lab. So in terms of our presence, we do have a presence on various platforms. Do keep up to date with what is going on in the chapter, especially through um, our LinkedIn address. In terms of the learning lab that I mentioned, the first one is there are 3 streams. The first stream has been completed or is in the process of being finalized, but everyone would be in time to register for the next stream. For those of you that don't know, these are sessions that are held in the evenings for beginner modelers. You don't have to know how to model in order to join the stream. It's free. You do win a very cool prize at the end. You are given the software so that you can develop the models. So, of course, excellent opportunity for anybody who is interested. We'll share the link to the stream registration in the chat. In terms of another upcoming event, we have the 13th South African System Dynamics Conference that's scheduled in November. So for those of you that want to submit papers, we are open for submissions. And for those of you that would like to just attend, it is a free conference this year, unlike previously. So we are hoping that this will afford a lot of people an opportunity to attend, and it is virtual. So we're keeping our overheads low. So I'm going to stop sharing now. And again, Dr. Sibanda, welcome to you. You're welcome to project your slides and we can get into your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pillay, and thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the colleagues that have taken time to attend. The idea was for me to try and persuade those of you who are already system thinkers to see in systems, as the title suggests. The aim really is to take systems thinking out of the academia, out of business schools, into everyday life. If I can achieve that, then perhaps I will feel I will have made a contribution towards the objectives of the chapter. Now, I'm going to talk on seeing in systems. The title is taken from a book that I'm about to publish by the same title, Seeing in Systems, and it's based on really simplifying what systems thinking is, taking it again from the academia into everyday life. I'm going to start sharing my presentation and I'll talk through it as we progress.
It is visible. You can put it in presentation mode.
Yes, let me just do that quickly. Okay.
Perfect.
Now, I'm going to start off by using a quote from Sir Albert Einstein. Most of you would have heard about Albert Einstein, probably studied a lot of his work. He said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Now, everybody will agree with this statement here. But when you ask, what exactly did he mean? You will probably get as many answers as the number of people you ask. In the systems thinking world, we want to think he was referring to methods of thought. The prevalent method of thought all along has been analysis, which has served us well up to the mid 1900s, 19-something, 20th century. And his point was all the problems that have been created in the world have been created using analysis as a method of thought. He was then advocating for synthesis, and synthesis is the bedrock of systems thinking. I'm not going to talk in about analysis as a method of thought or synthetic thinking for that matter, but I just thought I should put that as background information. Now, if I'm going to talk about seeing in systems, it sounds logical that perhaps we should start off by defining what a system is so that we are all on the same page. Now, a system is a whole made up of two or more parts, each of which can affect the behavior of the whole, and those parts are working for a common purpose. Each part depends for its effect on the whole, on what at least one other part and often more is doing. Sounds highly convoluted, but let me simplify it and say all the people on this seminar, attending this seminar, each one of you is a system. Why? You've got at least two or more parts, and those parts are working for a common purpose. You've got a heart, you've got a brain, you've got, lungs, you've got all sorts of parts working together for a common purpose. Now, the second sentence says each part depends for its effect on the whole, on what at least one other part and often more is doing. So if I'm a system, for example, my heart is very important. But my heart cannot affect me without depending on the brain, the lungs to supply the oxygen, etc., etc. So this then shows the essence of what I'm talking about here as a system. It's a whole made up of two or more parts, each of which can affect the behavior or performance of the whole. Now, if you were talking to a group of smart people, doctors, medical doctors, and you project this statement, one of them will probably say, hang on, hang on, hang on. In the human body, for example, the appendix, it has no function in the body. It doesn't affect the body. And they'll be quite right. But there's two things. Number one, it is not an essential part. In other words, you can do without it. Number two, that's why it's called an appendix. An appendix is attached to, but is not necessarily an essential part of. So many of you here, academics, when you write your paper, you write the full paper with all sorts of references. At the end, you have something called an appendix. No one reads that. So the definition of a system still holds. Now, in systems thinking, we are mainly governed by three principles. I'm going to describe these principles. Principle number one, the essential or defining properties of a system are properties of the whole which none of its parts have. And I cite a car as an example. That's another example of a system. A car is an example, is a system. What are its defining properties? Well, a car is supposed to take you from point A to point B with you in control and on the ground. And I'm mentioning on the ground to differentiate it from an aeroplane. So we are saying then the defining properties of the car are properties that belong to the whole and which none of its parts have. What are the parts of a car? Essential parts of a car are the engine, the injection system, the braking system, blah, blah. We can go on and on. But none of those parts have the properties of a car. The engine is very critical for a car, you know that. It can't move without an engine. But the engine on its own cannot move you from point A to B. In fact, the engine itself cannot move itself. So the essential properties only reside in the whole and not in the parts. If you go back to what I said about me being a system, my essential defining properties is that I have life. None of my parts have life in them. They only maintain their properties as long as they are inside of me. That leads us to the second property. When a system is taken apart, it loses its essential properties, and very importantly, so do the parts. Now, I'm a system with essential parts, my brain, my heart, my all the essential parts. Now, if you take the parts of me outside of my body, number one, I lose my essential properties, which is life. I lose life, number one. Number two, my parts themselves lose their essential properties. What is the essential property of my brain? My brain is supposed to help me think. Now, if you take it out and put it on a dish somewhere, that brain is incapable of thinking. More fundamentally, I myself will no longer be able to think. So when you take a system apart, its essential properties are lost, and the parts also lose their essential properties. This is extremely important because in management, whether we're managing a business, which is a system, or managing a university, whatever it is we are managing, we tend to take the parts of the system apart. And when we know this, if we knew that when we take the system apart, it loses its essential properties, we'll be very careful how we manage. But unfortunately, we tend to do that. Number three, if we have a system improvement initiative, which is directed at the parts of the system taken separately, the performance of the whole will not improve and often gets worse. Now, you running a company and you decide, I'm going to improve the performance of this company. I'm going to improve finance. I'm going to improve human resources, IT, whatever, taken separately. And you hire very competent people to man those positions in the hope that the performance of the company will improve. Unfortunately, when you look at it from a systemic point of view, the performance will not improve, and often it gets worse. I'll give you an example. If we gathered very smart engineers, automotive engineers in a room, and we said, look, we want to get the best car out of this room here. Can we decide which car has the best engine? Maybe by voting or consensus, they end up saying the Ferrari has the best engine. We note that. Okay, which one has the best fuel injection? Maybe they say the Volkswagen, and we go down the list of essential parts. Then we say to these engineers, can you please go outside, find a Ferrari, take out the engine, find the VW, bring the injection, bring the brakes from Tata or whatever has the best of those parts. Bring them back into this room. Let's now assemble the car because we expect that we'll get the best car. Do we get the best car? My answer is we don't. We may not even get a car. Why? Because the parts don't fit. So if you have a system improvement initiative which is directed at the parts of the system taken separately, the performance will not improve. Now, the principles number 1 and 2 that I've referred to actually have to do with a concept called emergence. In a forest, the forest has characteristics which the individual trees do not have. When you focus on the trees, you may see the details, but you lose sight of the patterns that arise when considering trees in the context of a forest. Thus, when we talk about emergence, we are describing what a system does when it interacts with its environment, something it or its parts would not be able to do separately. So the 3 principles plus emergence. We also have to worry about unintended consequences. This is extremely important. In systems thinking, we want to understand the interconnectedness and interdependencies instead of seeing linear cause and effect relationships. I'll give examples of this later. That when we do this, it helps us anticipate the unintended consequences of our actions. It is important also to recognize that cause and effect are often separated in time and space. I'll show you examples that demonstrate that. When houses were constructed, many of you are in Johannesburg, I'm in Pretoria, and many others in Gaborone and all sorts of places. When houses are constructed, normally we will have paved surfaces. In cities, we want to drive on paved roads. Unfortunately, when we do that and it rains, instead of water seeping into the ground, the absorption of rainwater into the ground is impeded. When that happens, you could end up with flooding. That's how flooding occurs. That, that is just one example of an unintended consequence of construction of houses and paved roads. So it's important to be aware of the unintended consequences of our actions. This diagram here simplifies things. I've made it circular, but often it is linear. In other words, you do something here, the effect is seen thousands of kilometers. You may not even be aware of the effects of your action, but I've made it simpler here so that you can see this fellow here. This fellow can see can see the consequences of his actions. But this is hardly what he intended, because when he pushed this slab here, the idea clearly was not to have the last one fall on him. But that just shows you the issue of unintended consequences. Now, I'm going to give you a story here. This story is fascinating, but sadly, it is true. In 1955, there was a prevalence of malaria in a place called Borneo in East Asia. Because of the prevalence of malaria, the World Health Organization then flew in copious amounts of DDT. Many of you will know what DDT is, dichloro, diphenyl, trichloroethane. DDT, a drug that's used for controlling insects. Now, the idea was to kill off mosquitoes which carry the malaria. And of course, the supply of the DDT had an effect on the number of mosquitoes. The number of mosquitoes decreased. And when the number of mosquitoes decreased, that also had an effect on the prevalence of malaria as it had been intended by the World Health Organization. If this was all that happened, we'd all be clapping hands for the World Health Organization for their intervention. However, something else actually happened. When the DDT was supplied, it was meant to be sprayed in people's houses. And these people were staying in thatched houses. The roofs were made out of thatched grass. Now, in people's surroundings, there were roaches on the island of Borneo. So the DDT was then absorbed by roaches. Now, there were lizards on the island which fed on the roaches. So the DDT then got transferred from the roaches to the lizards. Now, the lizards, some of them died after eating the roaches that had DDT in them. But the biggest effect was that the lizards became very slow, lethargic. Now, because some of them died and some of them became lethargic, these lizards were feeding on caterpillars. These caterpillars were found in people's thatched roofs. Now, obviously, because they were in the people's thatched roof, the caterpillars were munching on the roofs. So what then happened was, because the lizards are slow and some of them have died, the caterpillar population in people's roofs increased. When that happened, the thatched roofs started collapsing. As the roofs collapsed, now people are exposed to even more mosquitoes. Because remember, initially the roof over their head, now they don't have a roof and they're exposed to the elements. Now they became sicker. Not only that, something even worse happened. The lizards became slow. On the island, there were lots of cats on the island. These cats were feeding on lizards. Now, because the lizards are slow, it's now much easier for the cats to catch the lizards. So what happened? The DDT that was in the lizards now gets transferred into the cats. A lot of the cats started dying, but these cats were also feeding on rats on the island. So you can imagine, with the cats dying, the rat population on the island shot up, and a new plague was introduced onto the island. Now, if this was the full story, you'll be fascinated, but it doesn't end there. Because now they've realized, oh, the cats are dying because we sprayed DDT. Guess what the World Health Organization ended up doing? They had to fly in plane loads of cats onto the island of Borneo to try and counteract the unintended consequences of their actions. True story. Another example, in Bangladesh, it was discovered that people were dying because of diarrhea and cholera arising from use of poorly treated water and improperly treated sewer. So they said, what do we do? Let's drill boreholes. Let's go deeper, drill boreholes so that people can get safer water. Yes, the people got what was perceived to be safer water. But unfortunately, in Bangladesh, there is arsenic deep down in the ground. So as people were drawing water which was supposed to be clean, they ended up drawing arsenic, and they were poisoned in thousands. In fact, it is millions that got exposed to this poisoning. So the intention was to save people from cholera and diarrhea through using improperly treated water by drawing water from the boreholes. Unfortunately, one of the unintended, unforeseen consequences was that people started getting poisoned from arsenic, very serious poisons. Again, this is a real life example. The third example I'm going to give you is based on a river in southeast Zimbabwe. The river is called Save River. It flows from Zimbabwe and straight into the Indian Ocean in Mozambique. Now, this picture here shows a bridge across the Save River, something you cannot see perhaps um, um, on the left-hand side of the bridge. You can see lots of sand there. This river used to be perennial. It was, one of the large rivers in Zimbabwe. Now, unfortunately, because of the dire economic circumstances in Zimbabwe, what happened was that the government allowed people to do the alluvial mining of gold and other minerals along the banks of the river and close to the banks. And also, because of poor agricultural practices, there was a lot of soil that was eroded into the river. So this sand that you see on the top left-hand corner wasn't there initially, but because of poor agricultural activities and alluvial mining, the river has been silted. Why am I citing this example? Well, when it rains now across the Save River, because there are no longer any banks to contain the water, the rainwater, when it rains, the whole place becomes a floodplain. So a lot of villagers who live close to the river there are exposed to flooding. But I don't think this is what the government of Zimbabwe intended when they allowed people to do alluvial mining. This is an example of what happens if you don't consider the consequences of your unintended consequences of your actions. Now, cause and effect are far removed in time and space. I've made reference to that. Here's an example. The Himalayas, we know where the Himalayas are. They were usually covered in snow. And the rivers from the Himalaya down to India, some of them into China, were perennial. But right now, the rivers in the Himalayas have run dry. Why have they run dry? Well, the ice that used to cover the mountain tops has melted. Well, why is the ice melted? Well, climate change, global warming. Then you say, okay, did the global warming, climate change, did it occur in the Himalayas? No, it didn't. The greatest culprits as far as climate change and global warming are concerned are the United States and China, because those are the biggest polluters. They are the biggest economies and the biggest polluters. But you can see now what happened in America, tens of thousands of kilometers away, what happened in China, thousands of kilometers away, is now affecting what is happening in the Himalayas. And the climate change did not occur yesterday. It happened from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So you can see the cause and effect are separated in both time and space. Well, COVID-19 is another example. We experienced that here in South Africa and in the region. COVID-19 is supposed to have started in China. That's the allegation. But we felt it here in South Africa. Uh, when did it occur in China? I don't know when it occurred in China, but there was a time lag. After some time, we started experiencing COVID in South Africa. Now, this is an interesting one. Those who they teach this in the business schools, the broken window policy. I know when I went to university in the 1990s, this is one of the examples that was cited. Rudy Giuliani was, I think, he's still referred to as America's mayor. He was mayor of the city of New York. And this is well written, well documented. They will tell you there was a serious reduction in crime in New York. Why was there a serious reduction of crime in New York? He developed a policy where he said all petty crime, whether you urinating in public or you smoking where you shouldn't or you jaywalking, petty crime. Anybody who does petty crime, arrest them and charge them and lock them up. And indeed, there was a decrease in crime. So he said, you see, this is what happens if you deal with petty crime, then all serious crimes will be reduced in your city. And he actually went on a lecture tour all over the place. He was being invited and feted as this great guy who reduced crime in New York. However, in 2001, Donahue and Levitt did a study. Now, in that study, they found that the reduction of crime in New York had nothing to do with the broken window policy of Rudy Giuliani. It had everything to do with the passing of Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade is an act that was passed in the US in 1973. Essentially, it legalized abortion in 1973. So their argument was in 1973, abortion was legalized. Before that, it wasn't legal, obviously. Now, because it is now legalized, there were no unwanted children who were being born in the United States, or rather, the number of unwanted children in the USA decreased because of the passing of Roe versus Wade. And their argument was people who were born or children who were born to mothers who were not ready to have those kids were likely to commit crime. And this is why from 1973 to 1993, when these kids became adults, they were not prone to committing crime because they were born from people who really wanted kids. Those who didn't want kids carried out abortion. So you can see again cause and effect being separated in time and space. It has nothing to do with Rudy Giuliani, but a lot to do with the passing of Roe versus Wade. As you know, President Trump, I think, reversed that, or the GOP party in the US, or the Supreme Court, I think it was, the Supreme Court in the US has reversed that Roe versus Wade. Maybe in another 20 years again, we'll see an upshot in crime in the major cities in the US. One of the things we said earlier was that a system cannot be divided into independent parts. This is a humorous way of showing it. Dividing a cow in half does not give you two smaller cows. It will give you a lot of beef, but it will not give you two smaller cows. And if we knew this, we would manage systems differently. I'm going to rush very quickly because I was told there will be an opportunity for Q&A, although my suggestion was it shouldn't be called question and answer because that assumes someone has a question and someone else, maybe me, has the answer. I don't. I would rather have a discussion rather than a question and answer at the end. I'm going to rush very quickly through what are called system archetypes. I've chosen 3 of the most common systems archetypes. I'll show you what a system archetype looks like. I might spend a few minutes on this one, but on the subsequent ones, I won't. Now you have a symptom of a problem. Now you have a symptom of a problem. The quickest thing is to think, let me deal with this symptom very quickly. That generates a symptomatic solution. Now you can see the problem symptom and the symptomatic solution change in the same direction. That's why you have an S at the end of that arrow, meaning they change in the same direction. Symptomatic solution, when you implement the symptomatic solution, of course, the problems, the symptom must decrease. That's why you have a 0 there indicating that they change in different directions. But that same problem symptom will can generate a fundamental solution, not a symptomatic one, but a fundamental solution. The problem symptom and the fundamental solution change in the same direction with an S there, and the fundamental solution will decrease the problem solution. That's why there is a 0 there, but of course there is a delay. I won't go into the details about delays. What is important is to note that there is what is called a balancing loop, which is that B1, and another balancing loop B2, and a reinforcing loop. Let me very briefly explain why this is called balancing or how you can tell it's balancing. If a loop is defined by consistent arrows. You see these arrows here are in the same direction. So they are consistent. That makes a loop. Now, this loop is called balancing because if you count the number of zeros, there's 1 0 there. Whenever a loop has an odd number of zeros, you know it's a balancing loop. So if you look at this one again, using the same argument, how many zeros? 1 0, definitely it's a balancing loop. But again, you can see the arrows are consistent. Now, there's the R3. The R3 is supposed to be a reinforcing loop. Now, which loop is it? It starts there and it goes through here to the fundamental solution. It can't go there because that is not consistent. It's not in the same direction. We are going clockwise, remember? So it goes here and it goes there back to the symptomatic solution. So that's the reinforcing loop there. This system archetype is called shifting the burden. Here is examples. If you have a severe headache and you haven't figured out why, the easiest thing is to take painkillers. And you do take painkillers, as expected, the pain will subside and you are able to sleep. For the next couple of days, you do not feel any pain at all. After a while, the pain is back and more severe. You may be tempted to take stronger painkillers, but this will be a waste of time because the headache could be just a symptom of something else going on. In 2005, another real example, I developed what I thought was a terrible sensitivity in my teeth. I visited I think 6 or 7 dentists at different times. The first dentist told me I have sensitive teeth because my gums are exposed, blah, blah, blah. I must rather use a soft toothbrush and Sensodyne, because my teeth were too sensitive. That seemed to work for about 8 years, from 2005 until 2013. 2013, I remember very clearly, I was driving from Cape Town back to Pretoria. I developed this massive toothache, and I just could not drive. Long story short, I visited a dentist in Pretoria, and she asked me, "How many teeth do you have in your mouth?" I said, "That's a strange question. Who knows how many teeth they have in their mouth?" Said, "Why you ask me that question?" He said, "No, I need to know. Have you ever had any teeth extracted?" I said, "No." He says, "Okay, open your mouth." She counts. "You got 28 teeth." I said, "So what?" He says, "No, you're an adult. You should have 32 teeth." He says, "So what's the problem?" She says, "I think I've found your problem." "What is it?" She says, "Four of your wisdom teeth did not emerge from your gum. They are buried in your gum, and they are developing not straight as teeth should, but at an angle such that they are pushing against your existing teeth. No, then just remove them." She says, "No, no, no, it's not that simple. This requires surgery." So long story short, again, 2 3 weeks later, I went into surgery and they extracted my wisdom teeth. I have not had any sensitive teeth since that time. That shows shifting the burden instead of dealing with the fundamental solution, which was the fact that my wisdom teeth had not come out. All the other dentists simply said, you've got sensitive teeth, change your toothbrush and use Sensodyne. It shifted the burden from the search for a fundamental solution to a symptomatic solution. Another one, tragedy of the commons. Very quickly again, I'm not going to go through the loops. I've already described what happens. You've got a reinforcing loop there, reinforcing 3, reinforcing 4, 2, balancing and balancing. Now, if you use the same principle that I used to describe the loops, you can see why each one of them is a loop and which one is not a loop. And you can see why is balancing and the other one is not. Now, tragedy of the commons is usually cited when the easiest example is when people talk about fisheries in the Western Cape, for example. If you allow every fisherman to go out to fish and catch as much fish as they want, and of course, the first few years, they are all smiling because they come back with boats loaded with fish. But after a while, the fish population in the sea decreases. And they bring more technology to say, no, we must go fish further deeper into the sea. We need better technology. That may work, but after a while, you can see the catches are decreasing. In the end, it affects all the fishermen. And one solution to a tragedy of the commons a setup is through regulation. But here is real life examples. The city of Harare, which is the capital of Zimbabwe, has in recent years experienced problems in supplying clean drinking water to its citizens. What the citizens have resorted to doing, they drill boreholes. So each person who can afford it drills a borehole. The next year, someone drills a borehole and they abstract their water from the boreholes because the water that the city council authorities are supposed to provide is no longer clean, is no longer properly treated. So people rely on borehole water. But guess what will happen? Harare is an urban place with paved roads and houses built all over. So when it rains, what happens is the water runs off to the rivers and eventually to the sea. Instead of the water seeping into the ground to form your underground water, you can bet the underground water in the city of Harare is getting depleted. At some point, there will be very little water underground and it will affect everybody that lives there. Tragedy of the commons. Climate change is another example. You've heard President Trump saying, drill, baby, drill. Well, everybody has been drilling since the discovery of oil, I don't know when, 18 something. And guess what? We are faced with the situation now because everyone was drilling, building power stations, running cars all over. But now it's beginning to affect everybody. Um, The last example on tragedy of the commons, you've seen this. You live in Joburg and Pretoria, you've seen this. Now, you can see there I've titled it Shifting the Burden or Tragedy of the Commons. It can be either or. Why would it be a shifting of the burden? Now, you have an intersection in Johannesburg. That intersection needed to be widened. But because it has not been widened and the volume of traffic has been increasing, during peak hours, there is absolute chaos at that intersection. Well, what do? We ask out, is it called outsurance? I think it's called outsurance, to man the intersection and the direct traffic, blah, blah, and it allows the traffic to flow. When that happens, it's a shifting of the burden. Why? Because what you should really be doing is to widen the intersection. But instead, you put people on pointsmen, I think they call them. You put pointsmen at the intersection and traffic appears to flow. And as long as traffic flows, what happens? The problem is over because we have pointsmen directing traffic. But it could also be a tragedy of the commons because remember, these people have just knocked off from their offices. Everyone is trying to rush home to go and watch cricket or rugby or favorite sport. Instead of each one giving everybody else a turn to go through this intersection, everyone wants to go at the same time. And you have noticed when everybody wants to go at the same time, no one ends up going. These people are going to be stuck like this. I don't know for how long. So this again is an example of the tragedy of the commons. Last one is success to the successful ones. I'm not going to go through the causal loop diagram. That requires a lot of time, but the same principles will apply. Typical example. In a workplace, if you have a subordinate who you think has a lot of potential, you support him or her to realize that potential. It's typical. This is what managers do. When he or she shows growth, it reinforces your original assessment and you support them even further. But that's not the only story. There is poor Pearson myself, and you don't think much of Pearson. So you take all your resources, all your time, you devote them to this person who's showing potential. And poor Pearson, who's a slow learner, is neglected. So the one person continues to thrive and the other one continues to underperform. That's success to the successful. Good example, you have Martha, a girl in a family of 6 residing in rural South Africa. She has 3 siblings, all boys. Um, but these boys are younger than she is. So she has, when she comes back from school, she has the responsibility of fetching firewood, fetching water, cleaning the house, making supper, blah, blah. The boys are not involved in this. Now, guess what happens? She has very little time to do her schoolwork, but the boys who are excused from this year have a lot of time to do their schoolwork. Suddenly, even the teachers notice that the boys are really thriving, and Martha, the poor girl, is struggling at school. And this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. This thing reinforces itself. Mother continues to underperform, and the boys continue to excel. Not because they are necessarily more intelligent. It's just because mother is caught up in that vicious cycle. It is critical that we equip today's leaders and managers with systems thinking skills if we are to avoid symptomatic responses to the challenges we face. To do this, we need to have an understanding of systems archetypes, and these could not be covered in any detail in this presentation. Systems archetypes are simply patterns of behavior of a system. It is my hope that through these practical real life examples, I will have persuaded you to start seeing in systems and not just thinking in systems. I think at this stage, I want to thank you for your attention, and I would want to hand over to Dr. Pillay, but I would want to invite discussion sessions, not necessarily questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for that. It was an excellent presentation, Dr. Sibanda. I think your examples were so refreshing because they were new. They weren't things that, you often read about. So excellent presentation. I'm very glad that we gave you an opportunity to share your knowledge, and hopefully, you know, when your book is released, we'll definitely have much more in terms of the content that you just shared with us. So we got a comment. Is the recording going to be shared? Yes, it will be. Dr. Young actually posts it on our YouTube channel. We can send the link through to the attendees of this meeting. You've got a comment that says there's very practical examples that are being used. So can I take comments from anybody else that would like to say something? You can, Corne.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pearson, for presenting really interesting stuff. What I want to ask you maybe is these examples you use are practical, yet they are kind of retrospective. When we look back at it, we can see it, but it's quite difficult to see them going forward. Do you have any advice on how to see these going forward to prevent them from happening instead of us only seeing them retroactively?
Can I respond?
Yes, definitely go for it.
Unfortunately, as you know, Corne, they say hindsight is 2020 or something to that effect.